Camera's rolling, ready when you are.
Right, John, perhaps you can start by introducing yourself and telling us about hops here at Bishop's Room.
Hi, my name's John Pudge. My family have farmed here at the New House Farm, Bishop's Room, for at least 8 generations. We have grown hops as long as hops have been grown in Herefordshire, and over the years we have been involved in Bishop's Room and in the other parishes round about with a number of hop farms, and have produced many thousands of hop pockets in that time.
Now, you were telling me earlier about how numbers would swell in Bishop's Room. Could you tell me that? And you quoted some figures too, and the impact that had on the village.
The largest impact hop growing has had on Herefordshire and Bishop's Room in particular would be through its heyday from the 1900s through to the Second World War. In those days, the hops were picked by hand. Bishop's Room as a parish is very similar as it is today. We have about 600 people live here. In Hoppekin, in those days, the number would go up to 6,000. Hoppekin was the lifeblood of this village. All sorts of different aspects of the life in Bishop's Room, it all centred around the hop industry. The hop picking period, as I said, through September and October, the pickers would come in from all different directions. Most of the farms would have just one type of picker. Our farm here at the new house, we had Welsh in from the valleys, but next door they had pickers in from the Black Country, so they had Dudleys in there. Also, the travellers who would come in with the caravans and so forth. The largest hop farm in Bishop's Room in those days was the upper house in the centre of Bishop's Room. They had some very large kilns, some of the largest, if not the largest kilns in the country. And they were built in about the 1927, I think those kilns went up. And at that period of time, through the late 20s and 30s, they would have 3 separate camps, one for Welsh, one for the Dudleys, and one for the travellers. The upper house itself would be producing by hand over 4,000 hop pockets a year. And a hop pocket is 100 weight and a half of hops, dried hops, put into a 6-foot jute sack. Those pickers would fill into the village, and to put everything into perspective, as I said earlier, they had so many people coming in that we had in those days we had a policeman, and when it came to September, 2 more got drafted in, and there was 3 of them walking around, and at least 2 at one time together, because they didn't like to go around unless they were in pairs, because it was a bit rough in Bishop's Room at that period of time. Each farm had shops. There were 3 shops in Bishop's Room itself, and as I say, every farm, the bigger farms, had their own shops as well. The pubs, we're standing here at the new house New House Hop Pocket at Bishop's Room, and within a mile or so of here, I could name 7 or so pubs that were open and having a very good harvest themselves during that period. The other kind of things that would encroach on the day-to-day life of the village, of course, all the people in the area were out picking. The children came, the mothers came, everybody was involved, and they made money to get them through the winter. And of course the other thing that happened at that time was that when hop picking finished, the last day of hop picking in the village school opened for the autumn term on the following Monday. There was no set date. It was always the Monday after hop picking finished, and of course, the children were all in the hop yards helping to pick the hops, and the teachers couldn't be there either because they were in the hop yards. They were doing the booking because they were the ones that could actually do the writing. So there you go.
Fantastic, John. I just got a note here that your grandfather used to approach a Mrs. Williams by telegram.
Yeah.
So I'm just interested how these pickers in South Wales, in this case, how were they found, and how did they get here?
The pickers that came in for the hand picking in those days, they would be contacted. My grandfather, who was running this farm here then, would contact a lady in Wales, and he had a number of ladies down in Wales that used to then arrange for everybody in the area or that was interested would come up to our farm for that period of time. The ladies changed over the years, but the one of the latter ones I can remember was Mrs. Williams, and even when we were picking on with the hop picking machines, Mrs. Williams would be arranging the pickers to come up for whenever we wanted them. My grandfather in his time would telegraph them and then tell them when we would be starting, and a couple of days before the lorries or the whatever, or the train, they come in on the trains in those earlier days, would go down and pick up their luggage and bring them up, and they would then stay for the period of hop picking in the barracks here at the new house. Of course, one of the benefits of these pickers coming in from either the Welsh valleys or even in the cities of the city from Birmingham and all around the Black Country, as they arrived, the country air was just the same as going off on holiday. And if you think about it, they were here for a month, 5-6 weeks, and during that time, the value to their health was enormous compared to some of the situations they lived in the cities.
You just had this. You described to me the little boys. They would come, scraggly haired and white. And I remember you describing to me they'd have their hair cut and they were tanned. And could you just paint that, because it's such a lovely image? You could take out the fact that as they arrived, they came. Many of them were very pale, bedraggled. They weren't that well kept at all. The time they were here, the sun did its work, and they ended up with quite good tans, and the children themselves probably went home a lot tidier and more healthier looking than they ever did before they arrived. Now, you were saying before that you were one of the last Pudges thrown into the crib. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, during those days with the hand picking, so many traditions and different things came to light. One of the traditions, of course, was being cribbed. Where a person on their first season or just got married or whatever, they would be picked up and thrown into the crib and smothered into the hops. And this was obviously cribbing. And I probably one of the last, if not I am the last in my family anyway, to have been cribbed, because we were still picking by hand in 1958-59. And at that stage, some of the pickers, I was there with my father in the hop yard, not very old, but I was picked up and thrown into the crib. And Father had no hesitation but to laugh, so there was no problem of them just grabbing hold of me and smothering me in the hops. Very similar to the days when, as you moved on to the machine times in the kilns here. In those days, we used to put sulphur up through the hops, and what you would do is you would set fire to the sulphur, rolls of sulphur underneath the hops, and it would come up through the hops just before they're dried to kill the bugs and whatever. And One of the tricks of the kilnman in those days was that you'd accidentally get locked into a kiln. And of course, in the kiln itself, you would have the vents at the top. So what you had to do was to climb up the metalwork inside the kiln and get to the vent so you could get some fresh air. So it was another one of those little traditions that was centred in around the hop picking at that time.
Are there any others that you've had experience?
There's all sorts of different things over the years. We've been with the hop trade. I know that when I left school, there were a number of youngsters who were leaving school at 15, 16, and they would go onto the farms, and they'd start at that age and go through the different. A lot of them are actually still working on the farms now, or just retiring, and they would be asked to go to the next farm to get some sky hooks. And they go all the way up to the next farm, and the farmer would give them a couple of top hooks to send back. But of course, sky hooks there isn't such a thing. And it's very similar to being asked on the farms around here to go next door and get a rick mould, which is allegedly is a 4 pieces of wood that you set the rick into. And there's no such thing as that either. So there would be lots of things that would go on. In hop picking here, there was lots of tricks and jokes and whatever that were played. I know for a fact that on the first morning when we get somebody fresh, hadn't picked on the farm, and they were put onto a tractor, shown how to drive a tractor, and they would go 2 to 3 miles away from here to the hop yards to be picking up hops. And as they came back down we had one that came back down on the first morning, came through the village and couldn't remember where the farm was. So they turned right at the first turning. He ended up at Cheney Court, which is a farm just across the fields here. And James, one of my cousins, turned around and said, "In here." And so our first load of hops on his went through James's machine, not ours. And then he told him to go back and get some more. But by the time that he got his second load, he realised he'd gone to the wrong farm. So those are the kind of things that happened in hop picking. Lots of things happened in hop picking.
Tell us what the atmosphere was like on a Sunday. You talked about the different services and the singing voices.
On a Sunday, especially in the days when the hand picking in the village, those were the days when obviously the pubs were heaving and so forth, but there were a number of religious services that went on. St Mary's, the church in Bishop's Room, always had services. They had morning and evening song. There was a house known as the Catholic Church, and that was the base where some of the Catholic priests used to come and stay. They would hold services out in the hop yards themselves. There was 2 chapels in the area, and they had different services, Protestant services as well. So there was a number of services going on in the actual hop yards on a Sunday. Also, of course, as I said, the pubs were all full. In the village itself, Bishop's Room itself, there would be in front of the Green Dragon. They would be selling horses and traps and all sorts of things would be sold by the gypsies and travellers at that stage in the area just in front of the pub. You've got to remember there was virtually no vehicles or anything, so they just took over the place. There was people everywhere at that time.
John, about the 3 different groups, Welsh, Black Country and Travellers, were they mixed?
The reason why the groups of travellers and Welsh and the Dudleys had their own separate farms very often was mainly because when they went out into the pubs or into the fields or whatever and there was a dispute, and they ended up fighting. There was somewhere they could go back to at the end of the day, which was their own people, rather than going back to where there was potential problems. So that was a major reason of keeping separate groups within the pickers. The travellers themselves, they were some of the travellers I met over the years. They were lovely people. I had a lot of respect for them when I was growing up, because they knew all about the countryside and whatever. And there was rogues in all sorts of life, but many of them had really sound hearts, and they were great people. We're talking about the children out in the hop yards. The children themselves used to pick normally up to about lunchtime with the hand picking. And then they had the afternoon to roam the countryside and go scrumping and doing all sorts of things that we shouldn't have been doing. But there you go. We had all sorts of things over the years. I can remember even in latter years, 1976 I think it was, when we had that very hot summer. The apples, our cider fruit out here, the apples weren't very big. They dropped off the trees because it was a very poor season. And I can remember on the first night that the Welsh arrived, I had one of our Welshmen turn around to me and he said, "Well, that's a bit unfair." And I said, "What's the matter? You've gone and picked all the apples this year, so we can't have any." And of course they'd all fallen off because of the summer. But it was standard practice. I mean, even once during the 50s or 60s, there was a snap storm, and some of the area by the barracks, it was starting to flood a bit, and we'd finished hop picking, and it's all right, it's only the ghost of a hop picker at the back there. We'd finished hop picking, and Father said, "We've got to get them back down to Wales," and the men and everybody were there, and we were carrying out bags of potatoes and bags of apples and all sorts of things that had been scrumped in the 4 weeks previous, just so that we could get them onto the lorries and the coaches and things to get them away from out of the water. So those are the kind of things. Lots of things went on during that period. Yeah.
You told me one story. I'm pretty sure that at night time, the kilns were a warm place to be in. Some of the older Welsh pickers used to come up here and sit and tell stories. Or was that around the campfire?
During hop picking, the hand picking time, bound to have been happening then. There was lots of socialising going on in the evenings. All right, they went to the pubs, but they were around the cookhouses. In here we had cookhouses. Out in the campsites and things, they would have their campfires and so forth. But the cookhouses would be warm because they had the devils working in there. With devils are. Yeah, because it didn't come into the kilns that much, not here anymore. Okay. The social side of hop picking was a major part as well. Obviously there would be so many people going to the pubs and so forth in the evenings, but even on the campsites they'd be round the campfires. On the farms here, where we have the barracks and whatever, we had cookhouses, and in the cookhouses there would be the devils that they used to cook their meals on, and the devils were a metal container on 4 legs, which we put coke into, and they set fire to that, and that gave them the heat for cooking all their food and so forth, and it warmed the cookhouses as well. During the evenings, of course, they would all sit round and they would be singing and telling tales and drinking and doing all sorts of things, and a really good time would be had at that time. Lots of friendships and whatever were made during the hop picking period and during those evenings and whatever. Of course, during those 6-7 weeks of hop picking, it wasn't just the work in the fields. There was so much of it was the social side in the evenings. The campfires around where the travellers were, they would be sat round the campfires there. Most of the farms had their own cookhouses. In the cookhouses themselves, there would be devils, and which would be filled with coke and lit, and they were fired up all the way through hop picking, and the food and the drinks were actually cooked and taken from the devils, and of course those devils then provided the warmth in the evenings, and people would congregate in the cookhouses, and all sorts of evenings you'd have tales being told and songs being sung, and of course with the Welsh it would be really good singing, and those are the evenings when lots of friendships and whatever over the years were forged.
Tell us about the currency, John, on your farm.
Okay. The way the hand pickers were paid all through those years before the Second World War and just after was they were paid by the bushel. They'd pick the hops into the cribs, and the bushler would come along and take the measurement of the hops, which was a basket full of hops, which was a bushel basket, and i.e. why they called him the bushler. He would come along and put those bushels into green sacks, and they were then taken to the kilns to be dried. But there would be a tallyman that would be with them, or a booker, and they would book each individual crib's tally of hops picked, and then at the end of the day, or at set times, the pickers could go to the farmer, and the farmer would pay them so much for the hops that they had picked during that period of time. But they didn't give them money; they gave them coin. And every farm in the area had their own coin and set with the name of the farm on, and so they dished these coins out throughout hop picking. And those coins could be taken. I mean, in Bishop's Room, the coins from this farm and the ones around were taken. The pubs would accept them, the shops would accept them, and then when hop picking was all finished and wrapped up, the shopkeepers then would collect the coins and take them to the individual farms, and the farmers would then pay the shopkeeper for the money owed them. The pickers themselves, after the picking had finished, they would bring their coins, and the farmers would change those. But in those days, they would want cash for that, not checks. Whereas the shopkeepers would take a check. The reason is, one of the reasons why this was done, of course, was it meant that the farmer could pick his crop, and he hadn't actually paid a penny towards the picking until afterwards, because he was using his own coin. Soon as hop picking was over, he could then try to start to sell some of the hops and get the money back in to help to pay for the picking of the hops themselves. Of course, everybody talks about the nostalgia of hop picking and how much good fun they had and whatever, but it was very important to the economy of Herefordshire and to the valleys and to the Black Country, because all around here everybody went out and picked hops, and that money went to go towards clothes and shoes for the children for winter time. It was a bonus, and of course the ladies that came out and the women that came out from Bromyard and Bishop's Room and all around, they picked very, very quickly, and they tried to earn as much money as they could, and it was one way of actually making quite a bit of money compared to anything else in the area, and that gave them security through the winter months. Hop picking was a very busy time, whether it was during the hand picking days or when we were picking in our heyday here with the hop picking machines through the 70s and 80s and into the 90s with 3 machines. The busiest day of the year was always the first day, because you had to make sure that everybody knew what they were doing and whatever. That was the hardest day and the longest day of hop picking. But then as the days went through, it used to work your way through the different days, and it would become more of a routine and so forth. When we finished up on the last day, of course the last day of hop picking, you would finish up, you'd pay the staff in the afternoon, ready for them to go back onto the coaches the next day. So that night they all hit the pubs. There would be a party in one or other of the pubs for each farm had their own parties. They all finished on different nights, so you could actually go around to 2 or 3 parties if you knew where you were going. And those parties would go on way into the early hours of the mornings, and then they would really get onto the coaches and lorries and so forth and head back to Wales from here. And then suddenly you turn around, it was so quiet. The winter had arrived. It was October. You'd look round, all your hop yards were bare wire. There was no noise. The machines had stopped. The people had gone. And suddenly it was very, very quiet again.
Lovely, John. And just ask me one question about hop picking and recording stories like yours. How important is it, do you think, that we remember?
I think one of the things that we must do is to relate what happened. Many of the stories that I've got have come from my father and my grandfather, from the labour force, the different people that I listened to as I was growing up, the different stories that they told. I think that one of the things like this museum here shows is what happened during that period of time. It helps to record it. I think the fact that if we're going to get onto tape or onto film or wherever you can, the record of what happened in those years is very, very important, because otherwise they'll be lost. And once the memories are gone, and it's very difficult because I'm trying to tell you some of the stories of what I've been told, and some of them may have been what they were told. So it doesn't always come down exactly. Sometimes there's a little bit of flowering on it, but it all makes a good story, doesn't it?
That's great. That's lovely.
Wonderful.